Good evening. How's everybody doing? Great to be back with you and learning on a Thursday, Yom Hamishi. Let's light up the darkness. Okay. Hold on a second. I need to do a little reload here. Try to figure out what is happening. There we go. Okay, welcome. Who's in the house? Yehud in South Carolina, who says, I want to share a wonderful story. When I entered our synagogue on Simchat Torah, all of a sudden I noticed a Guns N' Moses hat on one of the members. And after talking to him, I learned that Mel knows Sal and saw and loved the movie. That is so awesome. And I heard from Sharon that she met somebody who knows me as well. I think might have been a connection on that hat as well. Melissa in Great Neck, Lucy in Minnesota, Nancy, North Carolina, Sharon in New Jersey, Renee in Indiana, Bill in Mid-Missouri, Lorraine in Texas, Bella in Florida, Belle in Texas, Chaim in Florida, Alan in New York City, Lester in Spring Valley, Ellen in Southern California, and Moishi in Brooklyn. Welcome, everybody. And yes, indeed, the movie is out. It's available. You can watch it wherever you are in the United States, Canada, United Kingdom, those places for sure. And then we'll get it. It'll come to other regions and countries as well. Not quite there yet, but it's coming. We're working on that. But if you're in the U.S., it's available now. Amazon, Apple, cable TV, DirecTV, Cox Spectrum, Google Play, YouTube TV, all major platforms. Most people are watching probably Amazon and Apple, but available for purchase or rent right now. So you can see it at home. Last night when we came out of the holiday, it was kind of fun to open the Apple TV and see, there it is. You can just like all the other movies, you can buy or rent Guns N' Moses on our cable system, on Amazon. And if you love the movie, we would appreciate you give it 5 stars on Amazon and on Rotten Tomatoes. Just help get the word out. The more positive feedback we get, the more the movie travels and people hear about it. God willing, the movie will be successful, so we can make another movie. Okay, that's what's going on. And I got to tell you, it was very special. These final days of Sukkot, we were together on Hoshana Rabbah. The hostages all came home, and so we were able to enter the final days of Sukkot in Israel. Shmini Atzeres and Simchas Torah is the same day. Outside of Israel, it's 2 days. And October 7th was in Israel. It was Shabbos and Shmini Atzeres and Simchas Torah. And it really is, it was very hard to feel the full joy of those holidays. For people who heard about it in that first year and especially last year. But this year, okay, so the hostages came home and the war ended. I mean, isn't that a great kindness of Hashem to end it right before that holiday so that we could reclaim the joy of the Torah and feel tremendous joy that all the living hostages are back. Obviously, we'll never stop mourning for everyone who was murdered that day and all the soldiers who fell in this war. But it does seem like the ceasefire is holding. Please God, it should be a secure and lasting peace. And we say Amen. So let us fulfill the mitzvah of learning Torah with great joy. As we get into it here, we have a double daf opportunity, which we will take, and it'll still be a normal length class. Tomorrow, we'll have class at the regular Friday time, Friday at noon Pacific. And then, I must tell you, I must share with you that I will not be here for a week. It's been a very long and tough summer just non-stop. We had the 2 releases of the movie theatrical, the one in July, then the one in September, leading right into the digital release now. And so I have a little family trip planned, so we'll not be able to teach from Friday to Friday, so we'll fall behind a little bit more, but we've done this in the past and we always make it up and get back on schedule. So we have class today, class tomorrow, Friday, and then we won't have class again until the following Friday, and then we'll make it up and we'll get caught up. But you should keep reading on your own, so you're prepared, because when I get back, we probably will do some doubles and triples and kind of move a little bit fast to just get caught up as soon as possible. One thing that I've definitely recommitted to, I committed to several things in this new year. One is to work on my Yiras Hashem, right? I already have tremendous Ahavas Hashem. I'm working on my Yiras Hashem, right? I have tremendous love of God. I tell God I love Him all the time. And working on my fear of God, my awe of God, being a little bit more disciplined because God said to do it, I'm going to do it. So arriving, I'm really trying to always arrive on time or early when I go to morning minyan. And just anywhere else that comes up, just being more punctilious, a little bit faster to do the mitzvah, making a heshbon hanefesh every night, kind of reviewing the day. What did I do right? What did I do wrong? Where could I do better? I'm sort of committing to do that every night. And once again, reading the Torah in Hebrew. So I made a siyum on Simchas Torah. I completed this year reading the Torah in Hebrew. Slowly, carefully. My Hebrew's not so great, but using an interlinear translation, I made it through. I just read every parsha, every aliyah of every parsha in Hebrew. Stumbled through, but really, making sure that I understand each word that I'm reading to the best of my ability, and committed to do that again. And to go a little bit deeper this year. So I was reading, I think it's the 3rd aliyah or the 4th aliyah, but this week's Torah portion, of course, is Bereshis, the first Torah portion in the Bible. God's creating of the heavens and the earth, the 7 days of creation, followed by the creation of the humans, Adam and Eve. And then I was reading, that they were both naked and they were unashamed. And then comes the story of the serpent in the garden, who was the most cunning of all animals. So if you read this in English, you don't notice something that you notice in Hebrew, which is very interesting, that they were naked, arumim, the plural version of arum, naked, and the snake was the most cunning of all the animals, arum, same word. So isn't that interesting? Now we have words in English, obviously, where the same word can have totally different meanings based on the context, and of course other languages have the same. But isn't it interesting that the word for naked and for cunning could be the same word in Hebrew? And that's obviously, the Torah is aware of that. And it's an interesting spiritual teaching because, normally we think of somebody who's cunning as closed, right? As sheltered, as hidden, as not revealing, right? The hidden intent. And naked, when we're not talking about, physically being naked, it's more like, wearing his heart on his sleeve, a naked intent. It's obvious what it is that this person wants. And here we seem to make it the opposite kind of suggestion, right? That somebody who is naked could also be cunning. Now, Rashi comments on this, that the snake, was sort of hoping to steal the woman from the man. Right, the snake had its own designs, right? And before the snake was cursed to go on its belly, it was an upright animal, and it thought that it could take the woman for its partner by getting the man killed, punished and killed. That's obviously not written explicitly in the Torah, but it's an interpretation that Rashi brings down from a midrash. But nevertheless, if we just focus on this one word, I haven't fully worked out what it means to me, but this idea that naked and cunning could coexist in the same word, I think it's a wonderful lesson, right? Because there are people that we meet all the time that, for instance, start their pitch by saying, to be honest, blah, 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 blah. And what are they really doing? What are they really saying? Perhaps they're claiming that they're, sharing their naked intent with you, and there's a whole deeper level going on, and that's why cunning and nakedness could coexist in the same word. But I'm sure there's more to it than that. It's just my initial thoughts on that. At any rate, I highly recommend to you to get an interlinear translation, right? So each word is translated in the Torah, and to, as much as possible, start examining how the Hebrew works in our Bible passages. You'll always get so much out of it in your faith and in the growth that you want to have in your faith. Okay, double daf today, pages 28 and 29 here in Tractate Zevachim, the 29th volume of the Talmud, continuing discussion of Mishnah number 4 here in chapter 2. We're about halfway down page 28a, and actually the Gemara right away offers a nice little summary along with the elucidation from Rav Steinsaltz of exactly what our Mishnah stated, right? Our Mishnah says that if one intends to consume the meat or sprinkle the blood of an offering outside of its designated area, right? So even at the time of slaughter, he has an intention that he's going to sprinkle the blood or consume the meat. If, for example, it's a sin offering and the priest is going to eat that meat. Now, he has to do that in the temple, and he has to sprinkle the blood on the altar. If at the time that he's slaughtering the animal, he has intent that he's going to either consume the meat or sprinkle the blood in the wrong place, like, for example, outside the holy temple, so then the offering is disqualified. But if someone goes ahead and violates that prohibition and eats it, he will have violated a prohibition. He could be subject to lashes, but he won't be subject to charis, which is death at the hands of the heavenly court. As opposed to if a priest has an intent to sprinkle the blood or consume the meat beyond its designated time, not in the wrong place, but at the wrong time, right? Beyond the allotted time for sprinkling the blood or consuming the meat, then the offering is disqualified. And if somebody violates that prohibition and eats that meat or burns it on the altar, he would be subject to charis, right? So the stiffer penalty for violating the rules about time than for violating the rules about place, okay? And now, of course, we're going to continue, really going deep into this puzzle of God gave us limited information on how offerings are brought, when they're brought, what the penalty is for doing something wrong, and the sages had to derive from the information that was given in the Torah how to cover situations that are not explicitly written in the Torah. And as I mentioned many times, it's not splitting hairs, and it's not it is unimportant that many of these situations are not practical and will never come up in the real world, because what God did by giving a Torah that didn't have every situation explicitly written in, and God knew full well, because the past, present, and future are all the same to God. God knew full well that he was creating a demand, right? Blessing the Jewish people with the Torah obligated them to study the Torah, and therefore demanding of them, of us, that we would have to delve deeply into the material in order to understand what to do in various situations, even when those such situations no longer apply, right? We're talking about bringing offerings. We haven't done that in nearly 2,000 years, but we still study it with the same intensity. Why? Because when we go in deep, like we are about to do, we're in a different place, right? We've left the mundane world and we're in the Torah world, a world that demands of us, great sechel, right? You bring all our intelligence, all our knowledge, all our analytical ability. Sometimes it's way too difficult for us, but we do our best. We do the best that we can. We work at it, and we are thereby elevated. There's tremendous benefits. First of all, we add to the safety and the peace of the world whenever we're studying Torah. And of course, we add to our reservoir of mitzvahs for the Jewish people, for our families, for ourselves. And when you exercise a muscle, it gets stronger. When you exercise the mind, it gets stronger. Okay. So I just told you about I'm just going to say it again. The Mishna states that if one intends to consume the meat or sprinkle the blood outside its designated area, offering is disqualified, but there is no liability for kares if one partakes of it. But if one intends to do so beyond its designated time, then the offering is rendered pigul, right, which means abominable or disgusting, and one is liable to receive kares if he consumes it or causes the altar to consume it. Then kares would apply. So now the Gemara asks from where these matters derived, and Shmuel says 2 verses are written. And the Gemara asks, what are these verses? So Rabbah said Shmuel is referring to 2 phrases from the verse, quote, and if any of the flesh of his peace offerings be at all eaten on the 3rd day, right, this is beyond the allotted time, it shall not be accepted, neither shall it be credited to he who offers it. It shall be pigul, and the soul that eats of it shall bear his iniquity. Right, so 2, very interesting. It shall not be accepted, nor shall it be credited. Right, so if you're bringing an offering, it's either it's because you have an obligation to bring that offering, could be a sin offering, could be a peace offering as part of your purification rituals that you're doing because you became impure, let's say through tsaras, or you had a vow of Naziris that you're completing, things like that. Obligatory offerings. So now you will not get credit for having brought that offering because it was disqualified. And it will not be accepted, right? Meaning that it cannot be eaten. And you can't do anything else with it, right? So that's a double penalty because you went outside. And then if you do eat of it, that's what we're deriving now, it bears kares. It shall be pigul, and the soul that eats of it shall bear his iniquity. Leviticus 7:18. So the sages taught that this verse is referring not to offerings actually eaten on the 3rd day, but to one who performs one of the sacrificial rites with intent to eat the offering beyond its designated time. That's why pigul. Now, when the verse states, and if any of the flesh be at all eaten on the 3rd day, this is referring to intent to consume the meat beyond its designated time. When the verse states, it shall be pigul, this is referring to one who has intent to consume it outside of its designated area. Well, pigul was about time. Why are we talking about space? And when the verse states, and the soul that eats of it shall bear his iniquity, i.e. shall be liable to receive kares of it, indicates that only one of the above disqualifications carries the penalty of kares for one who partakes of it, but not 2 of them. And this included case is intent to consume the offering beyond its designated time, and that is to the exclusion of intent to consume it outside its designated area, which does not carry this penalty. So the Gemara asks, but why not say the opposite? That when the verse states, and the soul that eats of it shall bear his iniquity, this is referring to the intent to consume the offering outside its designated area, to the exclusion of intent to consume it beyond its designated time. And the Gemara responds, it stands to reason that intent to consume the offering beyond its designated time is the preferable candidate to carry the punishment of kares, as the verse opened with it. But the Gemara rejects this. On the contrary, intent to consume the offering outside its designated area is preferable, as the clause that teaches liability for kares is adjacent to it. So rather, Abaye said, when Rav Yitzhak bar Avdimi came, he said that Rav says Shmuel was actually referring to 2 separate verses, and he relied on that which the Tana taught. The verse is seemingly redundant when it states, and if it be eaten at all on the 3rd day, it is pigul, it shall not be accepted. In the Torah portion that begins, you shall be holy, at Leviticus 19:2. Why is it redundant? As there is no need for the verse to state this, since it already stated, and if any of the flesh of his peace offerings be at all eaten on the 3rd day, it shall be pigul in Leviticus 7:18. Now on page 28b. Therefore, If the verse is not referring to the matter of intent to consume the offering beyond its designated time, apply it to the matter of having an inappropriate intent to consume it outside its designated area, designated place. And as for the punishment of kares, the merciful one restricted it to the prohibition of nosar. So nosar is not about intent. It's that at the end of the process, if you left the meat over beyond its allotted time, okay, you have to burn it. You can't eat it. If the person does eat it, then he violates that prohibition. So it's the same basic problem. The meat gets eaten beyond its permitted time, past the deadline. But pigul is where you have the intent to do that at the end, even from the beginning. That's what renders it pigul. And nosar is you didn't have that intent from the beginning, but it ended up happening. As the verse states, but whoever eats it shall bear his iniquity in Leviticus 19:8. So this indicates that one is liable to receive kares for partaking of nosar, to the exclusion of intent to consume the offering outside its designated area. That's how they know that it applies to time and not place. So the Gemara asks, but why not say instead that when the verse states, but whoever eats it shall bear his iniquity, that this is referring to intent to consume the offering outside its designated place? And the verse serves to exclude nosar from the penalty of kares. And the Gemara answers, it stands to reason that nosar should be interpreted as carrying the penalty of kares, because this would allow one to derive, by way of verbal analogy, between the word iniquity and the word iniquity, stated with regard to the case of intent to consume the meat beyond its designated time, that the punishment of kares applies to the latter as well, whether pigul or nosar. So the verbal analogy would be apt since one prohibition is similar to the other in that they share features that form the acronym Zion base. Both concern the offering's designated time, Zeman, and both are applicable to an offering sacrificed on a private altar, Bama. So the Gemara rejects this. On the contrary, intent to consume the offering outside its designated area should be interpreted as carrying the penalty of kares, because this would allow one to derive, by way of verbal analogy, between iniquity and iniquity, stated with regard to the case of intent to consume the meat beyond its designated time, that the punishment of kares applies to the latter as well. And the verbal analogy would still be apt since one prohibition is similar to the other, in that both share features that form the acronym mikdash. Both concern intent, machashava. Both disqualify the entire offering, even if one had intent, with regard to only a part of it, ketzat of it. And both occur while collecting or sprinkling the offering's blood, dam. And with regard to both, the verse contains an extraneous mention of the third day, shlishi. So that's how they say mikdash is the mnemonic to help you remember this. So rather, Rabbi Yochanan says that Zavdi Bar Levi taught it is derived that the prohibition of nosar carries the penalty of kares by way of a verbal analogy between sacred and sacred. It is written here, but whoever eats it shall bear his iniquity because he has profaned the sacred item of the Lord, and that soul shall be cut off from his people. And it is written there, and if any of the flesh of the consecration or of the bread remain until the morning, then you shall burn the remainder, nosar means remainder, with fire. It shall not be eaten because it is sacred. So just as the verse there is referring to nosar, so too the verse here must be referring to nosar. And consequently, when the merciful one restricted the penalty of kares to the prohibition of eating nosar, as the verse states, but whoever eats it shall bear his iniquity, this restriction serves to exclude the case of intent to consume the offering outside its designated area from the penalty of kares. We're going to apply kares to time-bound violations, either intent from the outset or nosar, that you finally ate it beyond the allotted time, but we're not going to apply it to violations of the prohibition on where the sprinkling and the consumption of the meat of an offering needs to happen. So the Gemara returns to the initial assumption that the statement of Shmuel is referring to two verses. And what did you see that led you to conclude that the long verse, Leviticus 7:18, is referring to intent to consume the offering beyond its designated time, and the verse that mentions the third day in Leviticus 19:7, in the Torah portion that begins, you shall be holy, is referring to intent to consume it outside its designated area. You could have reversed that derivation. And the Gemara responds, it stands to reason that the long verse is referring to intent to consume the offering beyond its designated time, as this allows for one to derive by way of verbal analogy between iniquity and iniquity from nosar that an offering sacrificed with such intent carries the penalty of kares. So the verbal analogy is apt since one prohibition is similar to the other in that both share the features mentioned above that form the acronym Zion base. So the Gemara rejects this analysis and says, on the contrary, it stands to reason that the long verse is referring to intent to consume the offering outside its designated area, and that the verse that mentions the third day in the Torah portion that begins, you shall be holy, right, Kedoshim, is referring to intent to consume it beyond its designated time. This is due to the fact that the latter intent is similar to nosar in that both prohibitions share the features mentioned above that form the acronym Zion base, and it is therefore reasonable that the Torah juxtapose the two in adjacent verses. And if so, when the verse states, with regard to nosar, but whoever eats it shall bear his iniquity, this excludes intent to consume the offering and beyond its designated time from the penalty of kares. Right? There's an area where we don't have an explicit law laid out in the Torah. We need a ruling of what to do when this is violated in order to understand what penalty we're going to apply. What they're basically asking is this area of the law more similar to this area or to that area, which would produce different outcomes if there's a violation, right? And then they keep doing the analysis, like, well, is it more similar to this or is it more similar to that? So rather, Rava says one must accept the original interpretation of Shmuel's statement that all these laws, with regard to intent to consume the offering beyond its designated time or outside its designated area, are derived from the long verse, as it is written, if any of the flesh of his peace offerings be at all eaten on the third day, it shall not be accepted, neither shall it be credited to he who offers it. It shall be pigul, and the soul that eats of it shall bear his iniquity. So when the verse states, be at all eaten, using the doubled verb, right, he'achol ye'achel, right, while we say be at all eaten, what it actually says, it shall not be eaten, right, that doubling of the verb, which we translate as it shall not be eaten indeed, or it shall not be verily, it shall not be eaten, right? That's why in English translations you always have those kinds of weird constructions. It's because when Hebrew wants to emphasize an action that is important, it doubles the verb, right? And that always invites some interpretation by the sages. So when the verse states, he'achol ye'achel, right, eaten it shall not be eaten, using the double verb, or if it shall be eaten, right, if any of it shall be eaten, would be one way to understand it, but not necessarily. So that's why they're translating it as be at all eaten, using the double verb. So the verse speaks of intent with regard to two consumptions, one consumption by a person and one by the altar. Right, so if it was a burnt offering, no person's going to eat any of that. It all goes up to the altar. But if it was rendered pigul, then you can't bring it up to the altar. So that consumption is prohibited once it's rendered pigul, whether by a person in the case of a sin offering or by the altar in the case of a burnt offering. The phrase, any of the flesh of his peace offerings, indicate, and peace offerings, right, those are actually eaten by the owner, although some of it goes up on the altar and the blood is sprinkled, of course. So the phrase, any of the flesh of his peace offerings, indicates that just as a peace offering possesses that which renders pigul and that which is rendered pigul, i.e. the blood, which renders the offering pigul through one's intent with regard to its rights, and the meat, which is rendered pigul through such intent, so too the verse is referring to all offerings that possess that which renders an offering pigul and that which is rendered pigul. So the term on the third day indicates that the verse is referring to intent to consume the offering beyond its designated time, as peace offerings may only be eaten for 2 days. Once it reaches the third day, you have to burn it. You can't eat it. If you eat it then, it's nosar. If you intended to eat it then from the beginning, it's pigul. The phrase, it shall not be accepted, indicates that an offering is deemed pigul following the stage of the service at which it would have otherwise affected atonement. Therefore, like the acceptance of a fit offering, so is the acceptance of a disqualified offering. And just as the acceptance of a fit offering does not occur until one sacrifices all its permitting factors, i.e. one sprinkles the blood properly, so too, the acceptance of a disqualified offering does not occur until one sacrifices all its permitting factors, right? As we've seen before, if you make two errors, right, that you sprinkle the blood in the wrong place, and you had this improper intent to sprinkle or to consume beyond the allotted time, then it is not rendered pigul because there were two problems, right? For pigul, you can only have one issue, the inappropriate intent at the outset to do something beyond the allotted time. If you introduce further problems, further errors, like that you sprinkle the blood in the wrong place, then pigul will not apply. The term he who offers indicates that pigul is disqualified at the time of offering due to improper intent, and it is not disqualified on the third day literally. And when the verse states it, this indicates that the verse is speaking of a disqualification of the offering only, but it is not speaking of the priest who is not disqualified from the priesthood through such intent. The phrase, neither shall it be credited, yechashev, now in 29a, indicates that to render the offering pigul, the priest does not mix other improper intentions, as I just said, mahashavos, with intent of pigul. If he has more than one type of improper intent, if he has more than one type of improper intent, the offering is disqualified, but it is not rendered pigul. So when the phrase states pigul, this is referring to an offering that one had intent to consume outside its designated area. And since the verse states it shall be and not they shall be, this teaches that intent to consume a minimum measure, in this case half an olive bulk, beyond its designated time, and intent to consume half of an olive bulk outside its designated area, join together with one another to constitute the minimum measure required to disqualify the offering. Again, this would be a bizarre intent that at the outset I was thinking, okay, I'm going to bring this offering, but I'm going to keep a tiny little bit beyond the allotted time and another tiny little bit and eat that outside of the temple. And so then the question becomes, in the world of absolute study as opposed to the real world, can we combine those two small amounts, which are each less than the mandatory minimum, to trigger violation of this law, even though they are different violations, one to eat it outside the place, one to eat it outside the time. So according to this, they could join together. And finally, when the verse states, and the soul that eats of it shall bear his iniquity, the term of it indicates that only one of the above disqualifications carries the penalty of charis, but not two of them. And which is this? It is intent to consume the offering beyond its designated time, as one derives by way of verbal analogy between iniquity and iniquity from nosar in Leviticus 19:8, that bear his iniquity means that one is liable to receive charis. And the comparison is apt since nosar is similar to intent to consume the offering beyond its designated time, right? Because both of them have to do with outside of its designated time. And therefore satisfy that acronym that helps us to remember it, Zion base. So Rav Papa said to Rava, according to your opinion, in what way do you interpret the reference to the third day in Leviticus 19:7 in Parsha Kedoshim, right? Torah portion Kedoshim. So Rava responded, that verse is necessary to teach that a given location is considered to be outside the offering's designated area only if it is so in three ways, i.e. outside the permitted limits of the blood, of the meat, and of the sacrificial portions. And so the Gemara asks, why not let me derive that law from the first verse? And if any of the flesh of his peace offerings be at all eaten on the third day, since the merciful one expresses that verse as well with the term third, since Rava derives the disqualification of intent to consume an offering outside its designated area from this verse, why not let him derive this law from that verse as well? or from the same verse. And Rav Ashi said, I stated this law before Rav Matana. And he said to me, if one were to derive this law only from there in Leviticus 7:18, I would say the term third is a detail and the term pigul is a generalization. And whenever a detail is followed by a generalization, the generalization becomes an addition to the detail, and consequently all other areas are included as well. And the additional verse teaches us that the law includes only those areas that are outside in three ways. Now, the sages taught with regard to the verse, and if any of the flesh of his peace offerings be at all eaten on the third day, it shall not be accepted. About this, Rabbi Eliezer said, bend your ear to hear the true meaning of the verse. The verse is speaking of one who intends to partake of his offering on the third day, pigul. Or perhaps it is referring only to one who actually partakes of his offering on the third day, which would be nosar, per the straightforward meaning of the verse. But that cannot be. Would you say that after the offering is fit for the first 2 days, it should then be disqualified retroactively by being eaten on the third day? Right? It's already too late. Right? You can't. The offering was already brought. It affected atonement, and everything was done properly. And then there was some meat left over, and it should have been eaten by the end of the second day. And it wasn't. It was eaten on the third day. But then did you go back and retroactively disqualify the offering? Or is it that once you ate it beyond its allotted time, okay, you become liable for violating the prohibition of nosar? That could be a kares-bearing penalty if you did it intentionally, but you don't go back and disqualify the offering, is what Rabbi Eliezer is saying or asking. Rabbi Kiva said to him, yeah, that's exactly what we do. We disqualify it retroactively. After all, we find with regard to a man who experiences gonorrhea-like discharge, right, a zav, or a woman who experiences a discharge of uterine blood outside of her menstrual period, known as a zava, or a woman who observes a clean day for a day when she experiences a discharge, that they all have a presumptive status of purity after immersing. Right? But once they have seen another discharge the same day, then it's like, oh, she's a nida. She's not just spotting outside her cycle. She actually is now a menstruating woman. Or he is not just having an emission, a random emission. He's actually got the status of a zav. And you don't know that until the second emission. So then retroactively, you see that the first one was not just a random occurrence that he could just immerse in the mikveh that night and be pure, but in fact, he was a full-blooded zav, and we go retroactively and say if he touched something then, even after immersing, no, but he's a zav, so that thing was rendered impure, like if it was teruma. But once they have seen another discharge the same day, they have negated this status retroactively, and everything that they touched after immersing becomes impure. Therefore, you as well should not be surprised about this offering consumed beyond its designated time, that even though it was rendered fit while it was being eaten during its time, it may then be disqualified retroactively. Rabbi Eliezer said to him, but the same verse says, he who offers it, indicating that the offering is disqualified at the time of its offering, and it is not disqualified on the third day. Or perhaps when the verse says, he who offers it, this is referring only to the priest who sacrifices the offering, indicating that he is disqualified. But if so, it would have been enough for the verse to state, he who offers shall not be credited. Therefore, when it states instead, neither shall it be credited to him, he who offers it, this indicates that the verse is speaking of the offering and not speaking of the priest. So Ben Azai says, why must the verse state it? It is necessary because elsewhere it is stated, when you shall vow a vow to the Lord your God, you shall not delay paying it. For the Lord your God will require it from you, and it will be a sin in you. So one might have thought that even when one who is late in fulfilling his vow is included in, it shall not be accepted. Therefore the verse states it to indicate that it, an offering rendered pigul, is included in the law of it shall not be accepted. But the animal of one who is late in fulfilling his vow is not included in it shall not be accepted. Right, late in fulfilling your vow, it does not at all have the problems associated with it and the restrictions associated with it of one who ate the leftover meat beyond its allotted time. Acherim say, right, acherim, what's acherim? Just means others. But as we've learned, because Rabbi Meir got himself in trouble with the other sages, he lost the right to have his name on certain teachings in the Talmud, and those then was replaced by acherim, right? So when we read acherim say, others say, we know it's actually Rabbi Meir who said. So acherim say one can conclude that the verse in Leviticus 7:18 is referring to improper intention rather than improper consumption from the phrase, neither shall it be credited yechashev, which indicates that the offering is disqualified by improper intention, makshava, and it is not disqualified by consumption on the third day. So the Gemara asks, and Ben Azai, who interprets the term it as excluding vows that were fulfilled late, from where does he derive that the verse is speaking of the offering and not of the priest? And the Gemara responds, if you wish, say that it derives it from the statement of acherim, that the verse rules out disqualification on the third day itself. This would be necessary only if the verse is referring to the offering and not the priest. Or, if you wish, say instead from the fact that it is written, they shall not be accepted, and it shall not be accepted, Leviticus 22:25 and Leviticus 7:18, it is evident that the verse is referring to an offering which may be accepted or not accepted, not referring to a priest and whatever disqualifies him. The Gemara asks, and with regard to the statement of Ben Azai, that one, right, in chapter 1 we were talking about priests who can become disqualified because there was something up with them, right? They became impure, or they didn't wash their hands, etc. Here we're talking about the offering becomes disqualified because the priest had an improper intent. Read that again. The Gemara asks, and with regard to the statement of Ben Azai that one derives from the word it, that it, i.e. pigul, is included in the law of it shall not be accepted, but the animal of one who is late in fulfilling his vow is not included in the law of it shall not be accepted. Is this law derived from here? It is derived from the statement of acherim, as it is taught in a baraisa. Acherim say, one might have thought that a firstborn animal whose first year passed, during which time it ought to have been sacrificed, should be like disqualified consecrated animals, and it should be disqualified from being sacrificed as though it had developed a blemish. If you have to bring a first-year animal, and now that animal is no longer in its first year, then are we going to call it, is it basically like an animal that acquired a blemish and it can no longer be brought? 29b. Therefore the verse states, and you shall eat before the Lord your God in the place that he shall choose to place his name there, the tithe of your grain, of your wine, of your oil, and the firstborns of your herds and of your flocks. Deuteronomy 14:23. So the verse juxtaposes a firstborn animal to the tithe of grain to indicate that just as the tithe is not disqualified by being kept over from one year to the next, we learned that in Deuteronomy 14:28, so too a firstborn animal is not disqualified by being kept over from one year to the next. Right? A firstborn animal should be brought in its first year, but it's not disqualified if you're late bringing it. If so, one already derives from this verse that an offering is not disqualified even if it is brought late. So the Gemara responds, nevertheless, the verse cited by Ben Azai was necessary, as without it, it might enter your mind to say that this matter applies only to a firstborn, which is not for acceptance, i.e. it does not serve to atone for any sin and is merely a gift for the priest. But with regard to other sacrificial animals that are for acceptance, right? Somebody needs to make an atonement. He needs to have that offering accepted so that he can move on with his atonement or purification. Say that they shall not effect acceptance when brought late. Therefore, the verse teaches us that even these others are not disqualified when brought late. The Gemara asks further, but still, isn't this law derived from a baraisa elsewhere? The verse states, when you shall vow a vow to the Lord your God, you shall not delay paying it, for the Lord your God will require it from you, and it will be sin in you, indicating that there is sin in you, but there is no sin in your offering, and therefore it is not disqualified due to the delay. You did something wrong, but the offering did not become disqualified. We can learn from that there's a sin in you if you pay your vows late, a sin in you, but not in the animal. I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. So the Gemara responds, Ben Azai requires that verse to teach a different law. The phrase, and it shall be sin in you, indicates that there will be sin in you, but there will not be sin in your wife. It might enter your mind to say, since Rabbi Lazar said, and some say that Rabbi Yochanan said, a man's wife does not die unless his creditors ask him for money that he owes and he does not have it. As it is stated, if you do not have with what to pay, why should he take away your bed from under you? In Proverbs 22:27, therefore one's wife also dies for this transgression of the prohibition, you shall not delay, since one has failed to fulfill his commitment. You might have thought that. Consequently, the verse teaches us that this sin is imputed to him alone, and his wife doesn't die because he leaves his vows unfulfilled or his debts unpaid. The Baraisa stated that acherim say the phrase neither shall it be credited indicates that the offering is disqualified by improper intention, and it is not disqualified by consumption beyond its designated time on the third day. You can't eat it, the nosar, the leftover, and if you do, it's a karas penalty, but you don't retroactively disqualify the offering, although Rabbi Akiva says maybe it does. But this says no. Whereas pigul, intent to eat it late beyond its allotted time, disqualifies the offering from the outset. And the Gemara asks, and Rabbi Eliezer, who derives this law from a different source, what does he do with the phrase, neither shall it be credited? And the Gemara responds, he requires it for that which Rabbi Yanai says. As Rabbi Yanai says, from where is it derived with regard to intentions that they displace one another? I.e., that an additional improper intention prevents the offering from being rendered pigul, as we've mentioned several times. As it is stated, neither shall it be credited yechashev, indicating that an offering is rendered pigul only if the priest does not mix other improper intentions, makshavos, with the intent of pigul. And Rav Mari teaches that Rabbi Yanai says, from where is it derived that one who has improper intentions with regard to sacrificial animals is flogged like one who transgressed a prohibition? The verse states, neither shall it be credited, lo yechashev, i.e. one who reads the verse as if it states, one shall not have improper intention. Therefore, if you do that on purpose, you could be subject to flogging, right? Only if you were warned not to do it and you did it anyway. That punishment is very rare, if ever, probably never applied. But the point is, you could be subject to it for purposely having improper intention. Rav Ashi said to Rav Mari, but it is a prohibition that does not involve an action. And the principle is that for transgressing any prohibition that does not involve an action, one is not flogged. So Rav Mari said to him, it is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who says for transgressing a prohibition that does not involve an action, one is flogged, a minority view. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 4. We'll pick it up tomorrow. I'm going to take a couple questions now, but we'll pick it up tomorrow, Friday, at the regular Friday time, noon Pacific, right here. And again, as I mentioned at the outset, we'll have class tomorrow, and then we won't have class again until the following Friday, taking a much-needed break and some family time. Okay, Sharon, there are a lot of Hebrew plays on words in Torah about snakes. I wrote a lesson called Snakes on a Lane for the B'nai Mitzvah kids. Thank you very much. That's exactly right. All right. I mean, that's what's so great about Hebrew. Like I was mentioning at the outset about arum, that it was both cunning, the cunning of the snake, and naked, the nakedness of Adam and Eve. And it's interesting that that's the same word, cunning and naked. And just one of the beauties of Hebrew is that it has a lot fewer words than English, a lot fewer. And so, because you're using the same word for multiple meanings, all those meanings, come to bear and have some kind of influence on whatever is being said in a particular verse in the Torah. And it invites, right, interpretation, spiritual discussion, spiritual inquiry. Lucy, it strikes me that the priest's intent is not something other people can know unless the priest declares his intent verbally. So how does the priest's wrong intent affect the person who brought the offering? An offering that ends up being pigul for wrong intent regarding space or time would be invalid, but it seems that the person who brought the offering may never know about this. Right. So if the priest just had an improper intent, didn't realize he had an improper intent, then no one's going to know about this. The priest made a mistake and he doesn't know. And the owner certainly won't know. But if the priest realizes he had an improper intent, and he says, I messed up, right? So then he's going to have to fully own up to what he messed up and inform the owner that, yeah, sorry, this offering was disqualified. You're going to have to bring another. Is there going to be a fund for poor people who it was a big struggle for them to bring that animal and now, it's disqualified? I don't know how that was handled. We haven't had a discussion about that yet, practically speaking. But it certainly would be on the priest, right? And that's because this is all of this. It's faith. It's a religious practice. There are many things in Judaism that it's very practical action. Did you do it right? Did you not do it right? But there's also a lot of things that require intent, right? Now, we learn elsewhere that with regard to charity, for example, do you get credit for giving charity to the poor? Let's say there's two people. One is like, the poor are suffering. They need money. I want to give them money. It's my obligation as a Jew to give tzedakah, and I want to give it to those people so that hopefully they will have what to eat and a roof over their head and a bed to sleep on. And then there's another guy who says, I want everyone in town to know how much money I give so they think I'm a big man. And because I give so much charity, they'll think I'm generous, and they'll appoint me to serve on boards, board of directors, because I'm such a generous guy. And then I'll acquire more power and influence. I'll be able to make bigger deals because I'm, do all the networking that board members can do. And obviously those intents of those two people are very different, vastly different. One is pure and presumably what the Torah intended by obligating us to give charity, and the other seems, terrible, right? A big hypocrite. But the poor person who is receiving the charity could care less what the intent of the giver was, as long as he now can eat his dinner and feed his children and have a roof over their head and clothing and bed, etc. And so the Talmud teaches elsewhere that even if he's doing it for the wrong reason, he gets credit, maybe not as much, but he gets credit. And it's a good thing to do because ultimately if you do mitzvahs for the wrong reason, in the end you'll come to do them for the right reason. The guy, who's giving for the wrong reason but starts to taste that good feeling of doing the right thing and helping somebody out who needs it. Maybe he visits the orphanage that he was giving to, and realizes that his money did a lot of good, and he's moved by that. And so he starts by doing it for the wrong reason. He eventually comes to do it for the right reason. And this is one of those areas in which, being a righteous person and just doing what God tells you to do also creates or always creates growth, right? Spiritual growth in a person. That's what I've got for us today. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Friday, at the regular Friday time, noon Pacific. Have a good night.